that's the practical policy person. I struggled with that question a lot, and I don't have any good answers, but I will say this. We need something that at least formally can protect the rights of birth mothers. Secondly, we need mechanisms for birth mothers to support the kids they have. And those seem like pie-in-the-sky aspirations, and yet the reality of the white baby famine, as it has been memorably called in the United States, is that as soon as birth mothers get any inkling that they can support their children, they do. Stranger adoption is not a practice that communities readily or regularly engage in unless something's pretty disrupted and pretty out of whack. So is that an unsatisfying answer? Is there and we shouldn't have war in places like that. I think that's right, and I think we have lots of ways that takes place, and transnational adoption is not one of them. In other words, that communities share children in all sorts of ways, and no, I don't have any romantic sense that everybody who gives birth to a child wants to raise it, but I do think that in the absence of some truly bad things that happen, or the illegalization of informal adoption, I think that we see a lot of other mechanisms by which children are transferred from one family to another, one person to another. The other thing I would say is one of the ways we can see how much public policy is at work here, and this is sort of to tack back in the direction of we need some kind of economic protections, is the changes that have taken place in the child welfare system in the United States under different kinds of political and economic regimes. So TANF, much more than AFDC, makes it very easy for women to lose their children, and we've seen a commensurate rise in the size of the foster care system. Even more profoundly, in the 1970s, in the context of the fight over the civil rights movement, this is a different chapter, not talking we saw a rapid explosion of the size of the child welfare system as single mothers became the targets of social workers and their children, who may or may not have been, perfectly okay before. I'm not trying to make the argument that all is well in families where people lost children to the foster care system, but they were functioning. I mean, they were going to school or whatever. Suddenly started to lose their children in the context of the fights over single moms in the 70s, especially black single mothers. So I do think that public policy can crank down a repressive apparatus on single mothers, or, and this is happening a lot in Latin America right now, you have to have a birth certificate for the children you're raising increasingly. You can, you see this in Mexico, you see it in Guatemala, that especially street vendors who are getting cranked down on in all sorts of ways are getting harassed about do they have birth certificates for their children. And this is on the one hand about the formalization of all sorts of relationships to the state, but it's also criminalizing informal adoption. Anyway, that was a side piece answer to it. Question, yeah. Yeah, it seems to me like the through line is about the ways that taking people's children away or making it difficult for people to raise their children is at the forefront of kinds of violence against communities of color. In the U.S., indigenous communities in Guatemala. And that's a story, one of the stories I'm trying to tell in this book is we map all sorts of violences, and they, and frequently we look to things like war or police repression and that sort of thing. And it seems to me that in the same breath, we need to map the ways that people lose their children. Oh, they're different, because they're different people.
So they're different groups of the Christian right.
Yes, I think we should differentiate. I feel like I have a lot of experience with this now in Arizona, between the nativist white right, which is not necessarily Christian at all. It's generally secular, the anti-immigrant right, and it's Tea Party and it's Palin, but and the Christian right. The Christian right brought Ronald Reagan to power. The secular white
Pat
nativist
Robertson would be Christian right.
yes, but the secular nativist right, white nativist right, brought the Tea Party to power. One of the things you can see in the last few years is like is a sharp decline. You're in Massachusetts, you know this. A sharp decline in anti-gay stuff, and that's when you think about the AIDS moment under Reagan and how everybody deserved to die of AIDS versus now when it's possible to argue that why there should be gay marriages so that gay people can protect their children because gay people adopt from foster care. What differentiates these moments? And it's the decline of the Christian right as a force in public policy and the rise of the white nativist right, which is secular. Well, you're talking about when you talk about tax money and where it went, you're talking about the really considerable tax breaks for adoptive parents. What you're describing is mostly a Sunbelt phenomenon. It's adoption is family law, so it's state by state. And so the ability, how much money you can give to somebody who's pregnant and depends on the state. And it's conspicuously the Christian right that's organizing what are sort of the new unwed mothers' homes. And some of them actually are homes, and many of them, as you say, are just putting people up in apartments, far from home, and usually in some adult state that they don't necessarily live in. So is there a relationship? Yeah. I mean, it's actually the same organizations that are, in Guatemala, it's Guatemalans organizing this, but it's the same structure of private adoption that involves sort of there's no intermediary state or orphanage. And so, yeah, no, I think there is a relationship, and I think it's a Christian right.